Picture this. You went with your best friend for a hike in the desert, but one wrong turn has led you deeper in, further from where you began. Or for those of you who love high altitude, imagine you're hiking through your dream mountains with friends by your side. Suddenly, the weather takes a terrible turn. Heavy snow starts falling and you're far from any help. Now, you have only one choice. Kill your friend for you to survive. What would you do in those situations? This is Fatal Tragedies, with the story of the most tragic hiking deaths in human history. Number 1. The Rattlesnake Canyon Story. David and Rafi became friends in college in Boston, where they met through a friend named Kristen Swan. Kristen and Rafi dated for a while, but the trio enjoyed attending parties and traveling together, forming an inseparable bond. After graduating, all three stayed in the Boston area. When Kristen and Rafi's relationship ended, Rafi and David grew even closer, with Rafi considering David almost like a brother. However, life took them in slightly different directions. David moved back to his hometown near Boston and worked as a traffic policy analyst, while Rafi pursued journalism, working at an insurance company, but also writing travel articles for the Boston Globe. David was accepted into a graduate school in California, and Rafi instantly knew they had to go on one less road trip before David moved. Eager to make this journey memorable, Rafi took some time off work and planned a 5-day trip to help David relocate. On July 30th, 1999, they loaded David's car with everything he owned and hit the road. This trip was not just about moving, it was about celebrating their friendship and the many roads they'd traveled together. Their adventure took them south, stopping first in Pennsylvania, then Nashville. In each city, they spent time with their families, played some pool, and enjoyed a few drinks, cherishing these moments together. Their next stop was Austin, Texas, where they met up with David's uncle. He recommended a detour to see the magnificent Carlsbad Caverns, adding another exciting chapter to their journey. Although visiting Carlsbad Caverns wasn't originally in their plans, David and Rafi decided to embrace the spontaneity of their road trip and detoured to New Mexico. The drive took longer than expected, and they arrived late in the afternoon, too late and too tired to explore the caverns. Instead, they set up camp for the night. On Wednesday, August 4th, they finally reached Carlsbad Caverns National Park. They chose to camp at Rattlesnake Canyon, planning to stay just one night before continuing their adventure. Rattlesnake Canyon features a moderately challenging trail that stretches about 5.4 miles. Camping there in August meant dealing with daytime temperatures around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, adding a layer of challenge to their already adventurous trip. Rattlesnake Canyon, a trail less traveled by tourists, offered David and Rafi a quiet contrast to the bustling Carlsbad Caverns nearby. Most visitors preferred the famous cave system just down the road, leaving the more rugged paths like Rattlesnake Canyon mostly to themselves. On the afternoon of August 4th, the best friends approached the ranger station with excitement, ready to secure a permit for their overnight adventure in the canyon. The ranger advised them to purchase a topographical map for navigation and recommended they carry at least 1 gallon of water per person per day to stay hydrated in the intense heat. David and Rafi, neither experienced in reading topographical maps, bought one anyway, hoping for the best. They also purchased 3 pints of water and 2 bottles of Gatorade, optimistically underestimating the recommended amount. As the evening approached around 6 o'clock, Rafi and David felt the cooler air set in. Convinced that the hottest part of the day was behind them, they decided the water and Gatorade they had would be sufficient for their short overnight stay. With light hearts and light packs, they drove to the trailhead of Rattlesnake Canyon, ready for a simple adventure. Their equipment was minimal since they weren't hiking far and only staying one night. A can of corn, a can of beans, a few energy bars, hot dogs with buns, and a small propane grill for cooking. They also packed a 2-man tent and sleeping bags for the night's rest. Upon reaching the trailhead, they started their journey into the canyon. The path they chose was a secondary, less traveled one, diverging from the main route. This path, like the main one, was clearly marked by cairns, piles of white rocks placed by rangers every 50 yards to guide hikers. Following these markers, Rafi and David hiked about 1.5 miles until they found a pleasant clearing. It was there that they decided to set up camp, surrounded by the quiet solitude of nature, ready to enjoy a peaceful night under the stars. That evening, after enjoying their simple dinner of hot dogs, Rafi and David slept soundly in their tent. Waking up around 8 o'clock the next morning, they stuck to their plan, pack up and hike back to the car. The morning air was fresh as they retraced their steps, following the cairns they had relied on the previous day. Confidently navigating the familiar terrain, they soon recognized the spot from their hike in. They knew that they were just about a half mile from their car. Taking a moment to rest, they finished their last sips of water, anticipating the comfort of their car's air conditioning in just a half hour. They'd even left a bottle of Gatorade in the car as a refreshing reward for the end of their hike. Feeling rested and ready, they set off in the direction they believed led to the trailhead. However, after walking about 50 yards, the surroundings began to look unfamiliar. Realizing they had missed their turn and inadvertently followed the primary trail instead of heading back to the trailhead, the two acknowledged their mistake. It was no big deal. They would simply backtrack to the last familiar spot and correct their course. As Rafi and David retraced their steps, they discovered a few cairns scattered along a small riverbed. They searched meticulously for additional markers to guide them, but found none. Despite this setback, they weren't immediately worried. They believed they were close to where the primary and secondary trails intersected, which should have made finding their way relatively straightforward. But things were about to get even worse. Realizing they needed to find either the intersection or another recognizable spot on the trail, they decided to orient themselves using the sun. Without a compass and finding the map more confusing than helpful, they put it away, choosing instead to rely on natural cues. Their plan was to head east, toward where they remembered parking the car. However, after hours of searching without spotting any further cairns, they decided to rest in a shaded area to rethink their strategy. At this point, they realized a critical error. They'd been searching westward instead of eastward. Lacking backcountry experience and the necessary skills to navigate effectively under these conditions, they felt increasingly uncertain about what to do next. As they contemplated their options, the weather shifted and it began to rain. Quick thinking led them to collect rainwater runoff from rocks, funneling it into their containers by spitting it from their mouths, managing to gather about 3/4 of a pint each. During the search for water sources, they also came across prickly pears, which provided them with much-needed hydration and a bit of sugar. Exhausted, yet determined, Rafi and David continued their quest to locate the trail, driven by the necessity to find a way back to their car after a long, challenging day lost in the wilderness. As darkness fell, Rafi and David made the disheartening decision to set up camp for a second unplanned night, unknowingly just a stone's throw from the path that would lead them back to safety. Overwhelmed by exhaustion and dehydration, their situation grew increasingly dire. Their camp was a mere 275 feet from the trail leading to their car, a trail that remained agonizingly out of reach. Surrounded by options, each one promising a way back to civilization, they tragically chose to search westward, deeper into the barren desert. If they had ventured north or east, they would have found their salvation. Even southward led to farmland, but the unforgiving terrain to the west offered nothing but isolation. Compounded by dehydration, their cognitive functions dwindled. The very ability of their brains to process thoughts and make decisions was impaired. As they huddled by an old foundation, they misread their map, misinterpreted their surroundings, and continued in the wrong direction, each step taking them further and further from hope. By Friday, the stark reality of their plight fully set in. Vultures circled ominously above, a grim reminder of their perilous state. The birds, symbols of impending doom, sparked a dark contemplation between the friends. "We will not let the buzzards get us alive," Rafi uttered. "God forgive us." Weighed down by fatigue and despair, they discussed a heartbreaking notion: suicide as an escape from a fate at the claws and beaks of the circling scavengers. In this bleak moment, their thoughts turned to survival, not from the elements, but from a fate they deemed worse than death itself. The wilderness, with its indifferent beauty, watched silently as they grappled with their dire predicament, a testament to the harsh realities that nature can unveil. As they returned to their camp, their strength waning, Rafi and David resigned themselves to their fate. Too weak to continue their search, they decided to wait for help to come to them, whether from a passing hiker or a ranger on patrol. As they sat near the old foundation, the grip of dehydration tightened its hold on their minds. Hallucinations crept in, offering cruel glimpses of salvation. David swore he saw bottles of water nestled at the foundation's base, and in their desperate hope, Raffi too believed he could see them. Rushing to the spot, they found only emptiness. This crushing disappointment plunged them deeper into despair. Their spirits shattered, and they descended into a state of utter desolation. The night offered no respite, only agony and torment. Dehydrated and racked with pain, they found little solace in sleep, plagued instead by nightmares of perishing alone in the unforgiving desert. As Saturday dawned, marking their third day stranded in the scorching heat with dwindling water supplies, their ordeal showed no signs of relenting. Each passing hour weighed heavily on their weary bodies and shattered spirits. As experts later analyzed the tragic events, they concluded that by this time, Raffi and David were utterly depleted, lacking the strength to extricate themselves from the canyon. Recognizing the gravity of their situation, they turned to their journal, penning heartfelt goodbye messages to their loved ones, resigned to their grim fate in the barren desert. With hope extinguished and desperation mounting, they contemplated a final, desperate act. They retrieved Raffi's knife, intending to end their suffering, but in their weakened state, they couldn't bring themselves to follow through. Sunday brought only agony and despair. David's body convulsed with excruciating cramps, racked by violent bouts of vomiting that threatened to suffocate him. In this harrowing moment, Raffi, his loyal friend, became his lifeline, clearing David's airway and offering him what little comfort he could amidst the overwhelming despair. Through the long, torturous night, sleep eluded them both. David's cries for help pierced the darkness, his body contorted with pain, begging for release. In his anguish, he pleaded with Raffi to end his suffering, a request Raffi could neither grant nor deny. In this somber moment, faced with an impossible choice, Raffi acted. He took out his 4-inch knife blade and plunged it into David's chest. With a heavy heart, Raffi withdrew the knife, and as air escaped David's chest, a grim realization dawned. He hadn't found his heart, but had punctured his lung. In a moment fraught with unbearable anguish, Raffi knew what needed to be done. David's calm acceptance mirrored Raffi's resolve as he steeled himself for the unthinkable. "I have to do it again," Raffi murmured, his voice laden with sorrow. "Okay," David replied softly, his trust unwavering in his friend's hands. With trembling hands and a heavy heart, Raffi plunged the knife once more, this time finding its mark. As David's life ebbed away, Raffi cradled his friend's hand, offering what solace he could in those final moments. With gentle reverence, he covered David's face with his shirt, a silent tribute to the life lost far too soon. Around 1:30 p.m. on August 8th, Park Ranger Lance Matson stood by a maroon Mazda from Massachusetts, overlooking the vast canyon below. The camping permit assigned to the vehicle had been issued for 2 men, just a 4-day stay, yet they hadn't returned. As he scanned the rugged terrain, Matson couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. With a sense of urgency, he set out on foot, accompanied by a park volunteer, toward the Rattlesnake Canyon Trail. After a challenging trek across the mountainside, Matson finally reached the campsite, but it was eerily empty. Just as he began to worry, a figure emerged from under a tent, disheveled and desperate. "Please, tell me you have water," gasped Raffi, his voice strained with exhaustion. With concern etched on his face, Matson offered a bottle, watching as Raffi drank greedily, his body betraying the signs of severe dehydration. "Where's your buddy?" Matson inquired, searching the surrounding area for any sign of the missing camper. "Over there," Raffi replied, his voice trembling as he pointed towards the rocky expanse beyond, but there was no one in sight. Confusion clouded Matson's mind as he pressed for more information. Then, in a voice choked with emotion, Raffi uttered the words that sent a chill down Matson's spine. "I killed him." As the story unfolded, only one man survived to tell what happened in the desert. Raffi's version of events, backed by experts and park rangers, became the main story. Rafi's lawyers argued that he killed David out of mercy and not out of any form of malice, and it wasn't an unusual criminal case. It was a strange and tragic situation that the two men had found themselves in. Despite the seriousness of the situation, many people believed Rafi's story, including the prosecutor as well as David's family. David's family even wrote a collective letter to the court asking for Rafi to get a lighter sentence. And it worked. Rafi got a shorter sentence, 2 years in prison, with another 13 years on hold. During his probationary period, Rafi showed he was really sorry for what had happened. He served most of his time, got off probation, and since then, he's been a good member of society. Everyone who knew Rafi and David says that Rafi's a good guy and an incredibly loyal friend. They stand by Rafi's story, even though it's sad and a very tough one to believe. Now, you've heard the saying that choices have consequences. Well, this next story explains that statement to its fullest. Number 2. The Heilbronn Dachstein accident. Hans Seiler was a husband, a father, a teacher, and an experienced mountaineer. On April 15, 1954, 10 schoolboys and 3 teachers were about to join him for a hike during their 2-week school trip to the Austrian Alps. Hans, who was among the teachers on this trip, was the one organizing it. Little did they know what they were about to face. It would be a story to be told for years to come. When their last photos of the hike were finally published, the world was stunned. How could they get so lost on a mountain hike? And more importantly, what kind of teacher would do this? Well, hold up, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So let's start at the beginning. The morning of the hike wasn't just any morning. Those who were there said the atmosphere was electric. The night before, Hans had specially chosen the boys, aged 14 to 16, based on their physical fitness for a challenging day-long hike into the nearby mountains. The route Hans picked was a tough but well-known 14-kilometer, about 8.7-mile hike that promised unforgettable views and a chance for both the teachers and the boys to test themselves. The kids were only 3 days into their 2-week trip to Obertrin, a small, picturesque village in the Austrian Alps. They had traveled nearly 7 hours from their small German town of Heilbronn, which most of the boys had never left before. The trip was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, and interestingly so far, it had been just that. They'd hiked, climbed, and laughed together. For these boys, it was a thrilling escape from their small town, which was still recovering from the scars of war. How, you may ask? Mountaineering held a special place in the German heart. In the early 20th century, there was even a genre of German films called Bergfilm, dedicated to the idea of self-discovery and the mountains. By the 1950s, these films had lost some popularity, but their spirit lived on, similar to American westerns, but with more beer, lederhosen, and dancing. In 1953, just a year before the boys' trip, Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary had conquered Everest, fueling a new wave of mountain mania. This made the boys even more ecstatic for their very first mountain adventure with their favorite teacher, Hans, who would also be their experienced guide. But little did they know that things would turn worse. At 6 a.m., the group of 10 boys and 4 teachers, including Hans, left their hostel. The weather was mild, with northwest winds, a cloudy sky, and occasional light rain. Hans, or Mr. Seiler, informed the hostel staff of their route and expected return time, 6 p.m. And so, they set off on what promised to be the adventure of a lifetime. By 6 p.m., the boys who hadn't gone on the hike and the remaining teachers gathered in the hostel's dining hall, eagerly waiting to hear about the day's exploits. But as time passed, there was no sign of the hikers. Half an hour later, while the boys who stayed behind gossiped excitedly and enviously about the epic adventures they imagined their friends were having, the teachers and hostel staff began to worry. Unexpected snow had fallen over Obertron that day, but since the forecast for the mountain was good, nobody had been overly concerned. Still, It was getting dark, and the hostel owner started calling the huts along the group's route. To his dismay, he was met with confusion at every call. Nobody had seen a group matching their description. In fact, nobody had seen any group at all. All activity had been halted because of a completely unexpected snowstorm, the worst in years, was now raging on the mountain. The next few hours were filled with panic and confusion. The remaining teachers, the hostel workers, and eventually the police struggled to piece together what had happened. Everybody was asking the same question: why didn't the group turn around? And why wasn't there any trace of them along their planned route? Surely somebody must have seen them. But the answer, it turned out, was simple. They'd never even set foot on it. One of the teachers overheard the frantic conversations and grew confused. The route the hostel workers were discussing didn't sound like the one Hans had mentioned in the days leading up to the hike. Another teacher, who had turned back earlier in the day due to an afternoon meeting, had done so at an inn that definitely wasn't on the pre-agreed route. It became clear that the group was in serious trouble. Even though it was pitch black outside, 2 small but highly experienced search parties braved the blizzard that night. One got lost, and the other returned in the early hours, no closer to finding the group. Early the next morning, with the blizzard still raging, the largest alpine rescue operation to date began. Freezing temperatures and visibility of less than 5 meters made progress painfully slow. The sense of urgency was palpable. Parents, friends, and townsfolk all waited in agony for any news. The mountains, once symbols of adventure and self-discovery, now seemed like cruel, indifferent giants swallowing up their loved ones. Every hour that passed without finding the group felt like a lifetime filled with dread and with despair. As the storm continued to howl, the reality set in. These boys, who'd been so full of life and excitement, were now lost in a merciless wilderness. Their families back in their small town, still recovering from the war, could do nothing but hope and pray for a miracle. The rescue teams, battling against nature's fury, were driven by the desperate hope that they could bring these boys back home before it was too late. During this time, rescuers began to retrace the group's steps on the day they disappeared. It was just as they feared. Some witnesses who had seen them confirmed that the group had indeed taken a path up the mountain, but it wasn't the one they were supposed to follow. At around 9 a.m. that day, the already exhausted-looking group had been seen at an inn on a path several miles from their original route. By this time, the first snow had begun to fall, and Hans was reportedly warned about the incoming storm by the innkeeper. At that point, one of the teachers, Hildegard Matz, had to turn back to make it to her meeting at 11 a.m. The group was seen again by workers a little further up the mountain. Thinking the group was lost, the workers warned them against continuing and offered to guide them back down. But, unfortunately, due to his ignorance both times, Hans shrugged off the offers of help and warnings, insisting that they continue. And now, I know what you're asking yourself. How can a well-respected and experienced teacher drag his students up a mountain into a storm? But alas, the bar is in hell, my friends. Hans insisted he knew what he was doing. He was overheard saying things like, "They're young boys, they just need exercise, and they just have to warm up." Sadly, after his last sighting at 11 a.m., the group's direction was unknown. Despite a massive rescue effort broadcast around the world, their path remained a complete mystery. That was until 9 days later, on Saturday, April 24th, when rescuers stumbled upon something approximately 1 kilometer east of the group's last known location. It was a makeshift shelter. Following the trail, the rescuers continued to work their way east, deep into the mountains. Eventually, they spotted something else in the snow. At first confused, as they got closer, they realized that it was a hand reaching out of the snow. Here, they discovered the 2 teachers who had accompanied Hans, the newly engaged Hans Rupp and Christa Vollmer. They were found lying together under the snow about 3 kilometers east of their intended destination. Nearby, they found the body of Hans Seiler and the youngest schoolboy, who was just 14. The two were on the ground in an embrace, with Hans' jacket draped over them like a blanket. Among the bodies, rescuers found a camera with several photos. These photos would reveal a haunting story. Piecing it all together, the mystery of what happened became clear. Hans wasn't the mountaineer he claimed to be. In fact, hostel workers had warned him after he suggested several dangerously inappropriate routes in the days leading up to the hike. Though Hans reluctantly agreed to a more suitable route, he'd lied. That morning, once out of the hostel and away from prying ears, he changed the route without anybody knowing. The extent to which the group understood the danger they were walking into is unclear, but eventually they found themselves in some of the toughest terrain in the area. It's easy to get lost or caught off guard by sudden weather changes if you don't know what you're doing. It became painfully evident that Hans didn't. Boys had trusted Hans. They'd looked up to him and they believed in him. Their excitement for the adventure turned into confusion and fear as the snowstorm intensified. The photos captured their journey from smiles and laughter to looks of worry and desperation. Each image told a story of hope dwindling into despair. Hans Rupp and Krista Vollmer had stayed with the group until the very end, trying to keep spirits high and the boys safe. When found, their bodies lay close together, perhaps in a final attempt to keep warm, a silent testament to their bravery and dedication. The body of Hans Seiler, found with the youngest boy, painted a tragic picture of a man who had led his students into danger, perhaps believing that he could handle it. His final act of covering the boy with his jacket showed a flicker of the care that he should have exercised from the start. The rescue team, now more determined than ever, pushed through the relentless storm, each step heavy with the weight of loss. Now I know what you're asking yourself. Why would Hans do something like this? Well, later revelations suggested that Hans had notable character flaws, including a pathological dislike of authority. While his students adored him, some of his peers were less fond. Before he left that morning, the hostel owner had warned him about the unpredictable April weather. Hans had retorted angrily, "Why don't you worry about your own affairs?" As the media debated his guilt, the families of the victims initiated a civil lawsuit against the school. However, the lawsuit was eventually dropped. The question of liability was complicated. This was technically a community trip, attended by many from outside the school, making it hard to hold the school responsible. The school administration pointed to a similar incident in Freiburg in April 1936, where the teacher was found innocent. Some parents felt that pursuing the lawsuit would only degrade the tragedy into public gossip, so they let it go. Despite the media frenzy and the immediate aftermath, the question of Hans' guilt, whether his actions were gross negligence or something darker, faded into the background. It wasn't until 2014, when survivors were re-interviewed for a documentary aired on German television, that a more sinister side of Hans' character emerged. For some, this cast his decision that day in a much darker light. Hans' defiance against authority and his reckless confidence seemed to be driven by more than just arrogance. His disregard for the warnings and his insistence on leading the boys into danger hinted at a deeper, more troubling aspect of his personality. It raised haunting questions. Was it just arrogance, or was there deliberate risk-taking that bordered on the pathological? For the families, each new revelation was a fresh wound. They'd lost their sons, brothers, and friends to the mountains, a place that should have been a source of joy and growth. Instead, it became a graveyard for dreams and for lives. The community, still recovering from the ravages of war, was now left with an ache that time would struggle to heal. But whether Hans was the kind of person you'd like to have a beer with, the basic facts have always been clear from the archival material. He exaggerated his experience, he changed the route without informing the hostel owner, and he ignored severe warnings not to continue. While it's true that the weather changed rapidly and unexpectedly, it wasn't the weather leading the group that day. It was none other than Hans. In the end, perhaps such questions are not unanswerable, so much as they are immaterial. After all, so many have argued, Hans also paid the ultimate price. But nothing can bring those kids back. Their lives, filled with potential and dreams, were cut short by a series of preventable mistakes. As the harsh reality sets in, you stand at the edge of your decision, and with everything on the line, one simple question remains. How far would you go in order to survive? Let me know in the comments section down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in our next video. You're not going to want to miss it. It's a doozy.